and moves were made. Hands were shook, money exchanged hands, possibly drugs. But it was all good. It was all in the name of fantasy football.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dynasty. Like I said, we all see things differently.
Put it on his shirt.
I just drank what tasted like a root beer, but now I'm feeling kind of tipsy.
We're good like that.
Ride that unicorn, my friend.
I was really going to do an awful Mexican accent, but I realized how mad I'd be at someone else for doing that. So, hi.
We all are very intrigued and very interested in what will happen this year.
Welcome, everybody, to the Dynasty League podcast. I am Peter Livingston. I'm so glad to have you all here. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on where you're listening. I'm feeling good, and I'm excited because it's week one. I can't believe that it's actually here. Week one of the NFL season is finally upon us this Thursday. So, happy Thursday to everybody. This should be a lot of fun. Everybody's excited. Our group Slack is just full of chatter, and everybody's ready to go. I think that we are in for a really fun year. So again, this is the Dynasty. We are a keeper fantasy football league. This is a seasonal podcast, so it does not run every week throughout the year. We definitely take a break, and we start up again at the NFL draft. So thank you guys so much for listening. This is a league in which 12 friends enter, one leaves champion. And we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. We're definitely going to be going through our matchups for this week. It is our rivalry week, as Yahoo likes to put it, because all of these are divisional games. We have three divisions. We have the He-Man Woman Haters Club, the Bad Sports Puns, and Roger Godeliot Divisions, 12-team league, keeper league, and the fact that you can keep as many players as you want with the 2-round penalty from the round that they were kept and or drafted in. And you can't keep anybody earlier than the 3rd round. Our first matchup this week. Actually, before we jump into it, we need to talk about some transactions that happened. As per usual, a lot of moving, a lot of people dropped, a lot of people being added off the free agency and waiver wire. A lot of moving pieces. So I needed a defense and a tight end. I didn't have one after the draft, so I went and got the Carolina defense, and I went and got Eric Ebron. I don't know if he's quite set in stone, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. James Conner got picked up by Joe's team, which is aptly named Team, who is going to be the backup running back for Le'Veon Bell, in hopes that he can recreate the magic that we've been seeing with backup running backs in Pittsburgh the past few years. Also, Eric Decker got picked up, and Kenny Stills. The LA Rams got picked up. Rex Burkhead got dropped by the Golden Tate Warriors. And then there was a trade. Deshaun Jackson for Josh Doxson with a 12 and a 7th swapped between Nate Silver Sith, our commissioner, and then Team Reputation, which this person, I cannot say his name. I can only call him Irma due to some events that happened in our Slack group. Slack, in case you guys don't know, is a communications tool that you can download for free and use. It's a lot of fun. And we had these custom emojis that were made for it. And this person, Irma, not his real name, but Irma went in and deleted almost all of the custom emojis that we had put time into making and adding to the Slack. And needless to say, people were not happy. So because of that, and because of some other things that had happened earlier in the year regarding our intro for the podcast, Irma had to change his team name to Reputation with a phenomenal picture of Taylor Swift. So, good stuff there. And then I made a trade to Sparty Party, which is Scott's team. He's from Michigan. He's not a fan of Michigan State. He detests Michigan State. He goes to, I think, Western Michigan? Or Central. I think Central Michigan. And I traded him Paul Perkins, an 8th and a 10th, for a 5th and a 7th round. And that was essentially because I had to make room on my roster for a tight end. And instead of just dropping him, I wanted to try and get something for Paul Perkins. And I don't know. I always preach don't put too much into the preseason. But I don't know. After his rookie year last year, I know the argument is, well, maybe he turns it around a little bit in his sophomore season. But I just wasn't feeling it. And it might come back to bite me, but I decided to try and move him. Keep some of my younger rookies and that were drafted earlier and move Paul Perkins. So those were probably the biggest ones. And then Joe's rolling the dice on Josh Gordon. I think he's feeling good. It's been a few years. Maybe he's finally paid his dues. The league being under duress from Tom Brady the other year, and now with Ezekiel Elliott. And then I think maybe there's starting to be a little bit of a softer stance, maybe some outside pressure on Josh Gordon because of the marijuana issue. I think maybe the NFL, like I was saying, is softening the stance a little bit, and maybe that's what Joe's banking on, that they'll let Josh Gordon come back in and he'll be able to keep him for, I don't know. I can't remember if he was completely undrafted this year or if he got held on to in like the 13th. But the point is, potential to keep a player that was an elite wide receiver. So those were some of the transactions, some of the bigger ones anyway. A lot of smaller transactions taking place, stuff like, Shane Vereen getting picked up and defenses and kickers. So nothing too substantial. So those were the ad drops, trades that happened just this past week. Before we dive into everything, let's go ahead and do a brief recap of how things stand. So last year, we had Tim, our champion, Yo Soy Fiesta, returning to defend his crown. The second place team was Baked Brie, the lady of the league, Brienne. She finished second. And then Joe, who is our new president and was back-to-back champion, finished in third. So, new president this year, Joe. Robin is now vice president. Everything else kind of stays the same. So let's go ahead and jump into week 1. And I'll be breaking these, not just the matchups down, but also some of the fantasy implications, just in case you guys aren't part of Keeper Leagues. We have some interesting situations, and I'll start with mine because it's the most relevant, I think, with recent events taking place down in the state of Florida. So the projection for this game is 105.36 to 96.83, favoring me over to here. Team the Teabaggers. So Fighting Sponges versus the Teabaggers. I am favored 105.96. Reason why I say this is interesting is because of the fact that I have both Jay Ajayi and Mike Evans. And no pun intended, it's almost like the perfect storm. I've always, the past 2 years, I should say, we're actually split 50-50 in our matchups, but I have not beaten Tahir in 2 years, and I usually face him in the first week. And I think I'm typically favored, and then weird stuff happens, and then Tahir beats me. And this definitely feels like no surprise. The fact that I had to now sit Mike Evans and JHIE because they weren't able to move to a neutral site. They're going to be playing in Week 11. So what I had to do is I had to dig into my bench, and I am now starting Jeremy Maclin in place of Mike Evans. Can't say that's exactly an upgrade. And then I moved Terrence West in for JHIE. So that's definitely something a lot of people are wrestling with this week in terms of running backs, in terms of wide receivers. So I don't think people should have much of a problem finding a wide receiver to plug in off of waivers, regardless of the league that you play in, because there's always so much depth at wide receiver. It's hard to replace a Mike Evans. That's without a doubt, but you can find a lot of good potential there, and even some if somebody like a Ted Ginn isn't drafted, you can go and get somebody like that. Running backs, you can look at maybe something like Wendell Smallwood or somebody that has a shot at producing some form of fantasy production. So let's go ahead and look at this. Quarterbacks, I have Aaron Rodgers. My wide receivers are Terrell Pryor, Alshon Jeffrey, Jeremy Maclin. So looking at the quarterback matchup for me, 23 projected points, essentially 24 for Aaron Rodgers. It is against Seattle, but it is at home. So I don't know if he's quite got 23 points, 23.6 points. I think it might be a little bit less, but I think because it's at home, he has a good chance of flirting with that 20-point mark. So I'm feeling okay there. Terrell Pryor against Philadelphia. It is at home. Philadelphia is a pretty good defense. It's the same thing. He's projected at around 11 points. But those NFC East matchups are typically, the game flow is like this with NFC East matchups. It either starts out incredibly slow and then ramps up, or there's like a quick burst in the first quarter or quarter and a half, and then it kind of just starts to die off. And that's typically an NFC East matchup. I don't know why it is that way. Being a Redskins fan, seen plenty of NFC East games, and that's always the game flow. It's either a huge explosion early on and then not much after, or it's dead and then just there's a barrage around the fourth quarter. So we'll see what happens. We'll definitely see with that. And then on the flip side, I also have Alshon Jeffrey going up against Washington. It is on the road. I'm not holding my breath with Alshon Jeffrey because the past few years outside of his rookie year, he hasn't really done much of anything. So just like every other season, everything's pointing to, he's going to have a great year. He's going to have a great game. I'm not going to buy it until I finally see it. But 10 points. If I get 10 points from Alshon Jeffrey, I'll be happy. And then Jeremy Maclin, who I'm kind of bringing in against Cincinnati. These are typically not the best matchups when Cincinnati and Baltimore play, because they're typically low-scoring affairs, very grindy. The touchdowns are very random, a lot of field goals. These are typically 13-10, 17-13 games. And the only saving grace is that I'm hoping for there to be a lot of balls thrown Jeremy Maclin's direction. Hasn't had a chance to really work with Joe Flacco, but I don't know if they'll throw as much as they did last year, but the hope is that by volume, maybe he'll be able to muster up these 8.7 points that he's projected. My two running backs are Mark Ingram and Terrence West, with Bilal Powell in my flex. So I like the Bilal Powell matchup, even though it is at Buffalo. I think just by being the best player on New York, he's going to get a good workload. And, barring a touchdown, maybe he hits or exceeds his projection. We'll have to see. And then in regards to Mark Ingram and Terrence West, based off of the first 5 or 6 games from Minnesota last year where they looked like the best defense in the NFL, I'd definitely be worried about Mark Ingram but I'm kind of not. I think this will be a good test to determine whether this Minnesota defense is the real deal or not. This is something that we see a lot of in the NFL, where you will have new coaches, have a defense kind of emerge out of nowhere. We've seen it in the past with the Dolphins. We've seen it with the Broncos. Now the Broncos were able to recover and they have an elite defense again. But the point being, we see this almost every year where there's a defense that kind of comes out of nowhere and looks really dominant for a few games, and then people kind of figure them out. And that's what happened with Minnesota last year. After week 5, they got that first loss, and then they were never the same after that. And I think this will be very telling whether this is a defense to be feared, it is at home, or are they just going to be a mediocre, middle-of-the-road defense? So I think that the 9 points is probably pretty safe for Mark Ingram. We're going to see how the workload with Adrian Peterson and Kamara, how that plays out. But 9 points, that could be okay. And then Eric Ebron is right now my tight end. I don't know if he's going to be my tight end for this week. I can just pick them up and have him in there for the time being. The first few weeks are really tough for him, and Arizona was the best defense against tight ends last year. I think they gave up about 400 yards to tight ends and 2 touchdowns. It is a home game, so it is in their dome. They tend to play pretty fast, and with Anquan Bolden being out, I think you're going to say Anquan Bolden was, I think, the second or third most targeted just person in the red zone last year, like 20-something targets. So I know everybody in the league is definitely like, you got to get rid of Ebron, can't use him this week, and I definitely agree with that. It's a horrible matchup, but the hope is, I think with all these tight ends that I'm looking at, even on the waiver wire, you know, it's like Njoku, Ingram in New York, McDonald, Vance, who just went over to Pittsburgh. They all kind of seem similar in a way. Vance, it's, you know, he's going to be splitting time with Jesse James. How many snaps is he going to get? Is he going to get much of a look? And then on top of that, is he going to be able to see those red zone targets with Martavis Bryant, Antonio Brown, you know, and Le'Veon Bell in the backfield? He's kind of like the 4th, 5th option. So it kind of worries me a little bit. And Njoku being a rookie, even though it is against Pittsburgh, you know, there's a lot of things to look at there. And then Justin Tucker and the Carolina defense. The one thing I am worried about with the Carolina defense is that there's a feeling. I have 2 feelings on it. One is that this could just end up being a trap game, and San Francisco could surprise some people because they have a lot of young talent. And outside of probably their quarterback and their running back, you don't really know what you're going to get. So it is a home game for the San Francisco 49ers, and new offense, new head coach, new energy, very, very young team. There's a part of me that's like, this could be a little bit of a trap for the Carolina defense. But on the flip side, you have what was one of the best defenses in the NFL over the past few years. Last year, they had that Super Bowl hangover. There's a part of me that feels like maybe they get over it, and maybe they kind of reestablish themselves as a top 5 or maybe top 8 defense. And we'll just see. I'm going to roll the dice against one of my favorite teams, the San Francisco 49ers, and we'll see what happens. To hear Phillip Rivers at quarterback, his wide receivers are Kelvin Benjamin, Hill, and Cobb. Running backs, Cook and Lynch. So this is definitely a boom or bust team. We'll start with the quarterbacks, as always. So Phillip Rivers at Denver. I know that this is a road game, and it is against Denver. Denver is not quite the defense that they used to be, but they're still an amazing defensive team. I actually think Phillip Rivers is projected at 15.5 points, that he could outperform his projection. The reason why I say this is because everybody's healthy. Offensive line is improved, and I don't think that we've ever seen Phillip Rivers with all of these weapons in his arsenal, fully healthy, ready to rock. And I think that the Chargers can surprise some people. And, that might just be a little bit of wishful thinking in terms of production. But I think that it being a road game, I think that offsets the potential. But Phillip Rivers, I think, is going to have a heck of a year this year. But I think maybe that 16, 17 point range is probably going to be about right for Phillip Rivers at Denver. And I would probably pick the Chargers to win this game. I really would. Kelvin Benjamin at San Francisco, he's projected at 10 points. And I think that he can definitely get that. I think that Carolina, I think that the San Francisco defense will not be as historically bad as they were last year, but I think they'll be they won't be as bad, but they will be much improved. But I think that Kelvin Benjamin, the way he's been looking in the preseason games, I think that he has that connection back with Cam, and I think that the 10-point projection, I think that he might exceed that by probably about 2 points. He's definitely probably the favorite red zone target, and he's looking like he could have a repeat of that rookie year that he had, where he was 1,000 and I think 7 for yards and touchdowns. Now, his number 2 wide receiver, Tyreek Hill, against New England, I think it's going to be a dud. This is not the best fantasy defense, but probably the best defense in the NFL. And I don't think they're going to let him get away with anything. And if he gets his 9 points, that's, tip of the cap to him, but I don't think it's going to happen. And then Randall Cobb against Seattle. The thing that helps Randall Cobb is the fact that everybody's back and everybody's healthy, and he can kind of float around as that 3rd, 4th option, and maybe get some production, maybe a little bit under the umbrella. Take whatever they can get from Seattle. It is a home game. But Randall Cobb hasn't done too much this year, and I think he's just kind of hoping to be a little bit invisible, let all the focus be on Jordy and Adams and Aaron Rodgers and Martellus Bennett, and maybe he can kind of sneak in there. But it's going to be tough for him to hit his projection at around 8 points. Now, Dalvin Cook, right, projected at 9.4 against New Orleans. If there's anybody that has a potential for a big game, it is at home. New Orleans, as we all know, is not the world's greatest defense. And this is probably one of the matchups that worries me the most, because essentially even though I'm projected by about 9 points, essentially all it takes is one extra touchdown from one of Tahir's guys, and I can lose this matchup. So Cook, he's only projected at 9.4 points, but depending on the kind of workload he gets, if he can break one, it could be a monster game for him. So that is definitely probably the one that worries me the most. Lynch projected at 11 against Tennessee on the road. I think that's about right, and I definitely think he's going to get the goal line looks. They're going to move the ball. They definitely are. It's probably going to be a shootout. And when they get down there, I think they're going to pound Marshawn Lynch. And I think 11 is probably pretty safe. And then Kelsey against New England. This is interesting because I think he's going to get his targets. He's going to get he's definitely going to catch the ball because he does such an amazing job. But it's hard to say how he's going to do in terms of yards after the catch against New England, because they're such a good pass defense. Not necessarily amazing against the run, but they're really stout against the pass and game planning for major guys. And Kelsey is probably the best player on the Chiefs. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do to try and get him the ball. But him and Hill, I could see them underperforming in their matchups because they're out there in New England. And then John Brown, depending on how healthy he is, he could actually have a really good game against Detroit. They tried to beef up their cornerbacks over the offseason. It is on the road, but we've seen that if John Brown is healthy and everything's going well in Arizona, he's up for some big games. So, the Detroit matchup, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But we'll see. That 9 points could be about right. And then he has Sturgis in the Philadelphia defense. Okay. Let's go ahead and go to our next game. All right, we'll stay within the division. The next game in our division is going to be Nate Silver-Sith, our commissioner, against Tim Yo Soy Fiesta. The projected totals are 116-96. We'll start with the returning champion, Tim, who has Matt Ryan on the road against Chicago. I think you have to like that matchup just because it's Chicago, and I don't think they're going to be very good this year. Larry Fitzgerald on the road at Detroit. Until otherwise, Larry Fitzgerald, I think this was a good pickup for Tim, just not in the third round and not trading a second-round pick for a third-round pick. Second-round pick essentially being Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald is the number one wide receiver in Arizona until somebody steps up and proves otherwise. So he's projected at just under 9 points, but he could easily have more. Because until John Brown, until Nelson, until anybody else steps up, Larry Fitzgerald is probably going to get another 100 catches this year. And then DeAndre Hopkins at Jacksonville. This will be very interesting because will he get improved quarterback play? If he does get improved quarterback play, he should have a monster game. With Jacksonville, it's on paper. Everybody's saying they're supposed to have an improved defense, but we have to see it to believe it. It is a home game for Houston. Michael Thomas on the road at Minnesota, projected at 11. That's probably about right. And then David Johnson on the road at Detroit at 16 points. That could be too low. Knowing David Johnson, the guy can go for 30. Excuse me. Then he has Jordan Howard against Atlanta. Atlanta defense is going to be very solid this year, but Jordan Howard, I think, just kind of like Belial Powell, just by volume, I think he's going to get his. And then Jason Witten starting at tight end, and then Ezekiel Elliott. The other thing, Ezekiel Elliott going to get to play Week 1, it looks like, against New York Football Giants. He is projected at 15 points. The one thing that I will say is that I think that the New York Giants have one of the best defenses in the NFL. And there is a possibility of Ezekiel Elliott not hitting his projected total of 15 points. This will be an interesting game. I think he's going to get a heck of a workload, though. Because if they're thinking he's only going to get 1 week, they're going to make it count. So against one of the best defenses, we'll see what happens. This should be a fun one to watch. And then Dan Bailey in the Minnesota defense. So Minnesota on the road against New Orleans, at home against New Orleans. This, like I said, this is going to be, I think, this is going to be the matchup that will tell you if this Minnesota defense, if last year's first half of the season was a flash in the pan, or if this is going to be the real deal. And then the commissioner, Nate Silver-Sith, Carson Palmer at Detroit. Carson Palmer could have a really good bounce back year this year. Michael Crabtree on the road at Tennessee, projected at around 9.5 points. I think that's about right. I think he's going to get his good mid-range targets, and he's going to be targeted in the red zone. Brandon Marshall, who is looking to be Des Bryant light, going up against Dallas, projected at 8.5 points, which probably would mean he would catch about 20 yards and a touchdown, which is probably about right. And then Eric Decker against Oakland. Eric Decker, last year he was hurt. Year before was an absolute monster. He's been a terror in the red zone, and it's going to be interesting to see what Tennessee does when they get into the red zone because there's new weapons now. At least in the preseason, Delaney Walker is getting targeted, but not as much as some of the other guys, and so I'm starting to wonder if they are going to look for other people down in the red zone, and I don't think you should be worried about the Oakland defense. I think they're going to be horrible this year. Then Christian McCaffrey on the road at San Francisco, Jonathan Stewart on the road at San Francisco. Combined, they are projected for 17 points, which, depending on the San Francisco defense that shows up, that could be low or could be about right. McCaffrey will get the special teams points too. Will get return yards too. So he has that going for him. But if the historically bad San Francisco defense shows up, these guys could actually have some big games. And then Jordan Reed against Philadelphia. You have to think that Jordan Reed is going to do his thing. And then Thielen, kind of like the new hot fantasy wide receiver. Thielen out in Minnesota at home against New Orleans. If Sam Bradford can throw the ball beyond 15 yards, he could do something. And then Boswell and Buffalo against New York. So those are the two matchups in our division. Let's go on to the Bad Sports Pun division, where we have Sparty Party versus the Golden Tate Warriors. Matt Hughes against Scott. Scott being from Michigan, the Michigan man, as we said. This is essentially going to be a wash year for Scott. He traded away a lot of his assets after he did move into the number 1 overall pick. He gave up a lot of his resources, and then when Ezekiel Elliott the stuff started happening, he traded back out of the first and kind of just relinquished the year. So he's only projected at 86 points to 111. But let's go ahead and we'll start with Scott. He has Dak Prescott going against New York. I think the 18 points is probably right in his wheelhouse. Ted Ginn Jr. at Minnesota. This is going to be interesting because with, I believe, was it Willie Snead? Why am I blanking on the wide receiver for New Orleans? But Ted Ginn Jr. could be prime for another crazy year of big play production. So he's sitting there at 8.5, which could be about right. But if the Minnesota defense lets him get deep behind him, he could burn him and get a big play. His other receivers, he's going with some youth. He has Corey Davis penciled in there against Oakland. And then he also has Tyrell Williams. So he's going with two of the younger guys in the league. And both projected at 8.7 and 7.3 points. I'm interested to see what happens with Corey Davis. I think the injury scared some people away. And he went a lot later. So we'll see what happens this year. Eddie Lacy and then Paul Perkins are his running backs. I traded him Paul Perkins. Eddie Lacy against Green Bay on the road. We'll see what happens there. There's been news of Thomas Rawls, if he's hurt, if he's going to be able to play. And then Paul Perkins at Dallas on the road. You never know. This trade could come back to bite me. He's projected for 9.21 points. And then he has Austin Hooper starting at tight end. I think the 5.7 points might be a little bit low. I think he's probably I think he's going to have a pretty good year this year. I think he'll definitely catch a touchdown against Chicago. And then he has Josh Doctson as his flex with Adam Vinatieri and the New England defense. New England, they're only projected at 6.5 points, and I think that's fine because, like I said, they're not the best fantasy defense. They're just an amazing actual real-life football defense. He is going up against a pretty daunting team in the Golden Tate Warriors. He has Tom Brady going against Kansas City. Tom Brady is going to do Tom Brady things. Amari Cooper at Tennessee. Amari Cooper projected at 12 points. Golden Tate at home against Arizona, projected at 9.79 points. And then his last receiver he has going is Rashard Matthews against Oakland at home. Then Lamar Miller and Devontae Freeman make up his running backs. And this will be interesting to see how Freeman is used this year with the new offensive coordinator. And then with Lamar Miller, as I've been saying all preseason long, if you think that he can get any help from the quarterback position and keep defenses honest, I think Lamar Miller will have a phenomenal year. So let's see what happens. The quarterback play has to be better in Houston. Martellus Bennett at tight end against Green Bay. There's been a good rapport coming out of Green Bay between Bennett and Aaron Rodgers. So we'll see what happens there. He's projected at 8.3 points. I think they believe he's going to get a touchdown. Ty Montgomery is his running back with Blair Walsh and the LA Rams defense, which is probably a good week 1 defense. They still don't have Donald coming back yet, which is weird. The other game in the bad sports pun, we have Braggadocious 1-1 against Reputation. Braggadocious 1-1 right now is projected by Yahoo Sports to go undefeated this year. Undefeated, win points. And with this team, it looks like it could happen. Ben Roethlisberger right now is his quarterback at Cleveland, projected at 18 points. That's probably about right. AJ Green against Baltimore, projected at 13 points. Man, you know what? Like I said, really interesting matchup. Those teams, when they play each other, it's pretty ugly. It is at home. He is going to see a ton of targets. The 13 points may be manageable. Antonio Brown at Cleveland, have to like that. Martavis Bryant at Cleveland, you also have to like that. Melvin Gordon at Denver, Le'Veon Bell at Cleveland, for Pittsburgh Steelers, going against the Browns. On paper, it looks great. The only thing you're risking by not diversifying your lineup is a dud game that hurts you all across the board. But this has been one of the worst teams in football. I mean, as per usual, you can't not do it. And then Rob Gronkowski against Kansas City, projected at 11 points. And then Jimmy Graham rounding out the 2 tight end strategy at Green Bay. And Jimmy Graham, since leaving New Orleans, he had slowed down. And then I think last year we started to catch a glimpse of what could be for the future. So I'm kind of excited to see what happens with Jimmy Graham this year. If he can go back to being that number 2 guy behind Rob Gronkowski. And if he can, then Tahir has quite the duo with Gronk and Graham. So Prater and then Houston round out the defense. Houston defense should be fine. And then reputation. Excuse me. Let me take a sip of coffee. Team reputation. Cam Newton going against San Francisco. That could be a monster game for Cam. And if they can come out and they can come out firing and that offense looks good, and the defense looks good, I think that you can definitely start putting Carolina in that discussion, not just for fantasy play, but also for possible playoff contention too. So people are kind of excited to see. I'm excited to see this game because I want to see what San Francisco does as a fan. But then also I think everybody's kind of like, what's going to happen with Carolina? You know, they have all these weapons now. How different is this offense going to be? Is it going to be more efficient? Is it going to be faster? So it's going to be fun to watch. Wide receivers. Kevin White, Robbie Anderson, Zay Jones. I mean, Kevin White, it's kind of one of those deals. It's like, look at what you were and what you could be. Can he do that? Can he bring that back? We'll have to see. Robbie Anderson, though, he's kind of the low-end fantasy darling for wide receivers that you're supposed to be able to get, and then paired with Zay Jones, who right now is the number 1 wide receiver out of Buffalo. Hopefully he has somebody to throw to him. We'll see what happens. They're facing the Jets. Jets, horrible team this year. I don't think they're going to do much defensively. And then offensively, they only have about 2 people, Robbie Anderson and then Bilal Powell. So Zay Jones could get some good looks. And then Darren McFadden right now, only projected at 4 points. And Amir Abdullah also in there. I guess understandably so. People have been low on the projections for Amir Abdullah, not just on Yahoo, but on a lot of other places. And I know it's Arizona, but it is a home game. I think Amir Abdullah, I think he stays healthy this year, and I think he has a really good season. I just feel like this being his third year. I think last year, the fluke injury, he never really had injury problems. I think he brings it together this year. And Delaney Walker at tight end is just fine. And then going with the other hot wide receiver, Kenny Golladay out of Detroit, starting in the slot spot. And the Sebastian Janikowski and the Atlanta defense. So, very interesting. Very interesting. I don't know if you go and put Murray in for McFadden. Jacquizz Rodgers and Deshaun Jackson have to sit on the bench, of course, because of the fact that they have the hurricane coming through. But this should be a big game for Matt Keiser, barring a devastating game out of the Pittsburgh-Cleveland. All right, let's move to our final division. All right, the He-Man Women's Haters, which has the second and third place teams of last year. And there's gonna be some good matchups. The big one, we'll go ahead and do the big one out of this division first. And we have Marcos Belching Beavers against Robin of Fart Apocalypse. So the Belching Beavers, we'll start with them first. Projected at 110 points. Robin is projected at 110.35 points. Lineup for Marcos at the Belching Beaver. Marcus Mariota against Oakland, projecting at 19 points. That might be conservative. Brandon Cooks against Kansas City at 12.42 points. That could also be conservative. You have crazy Tom Brady. Kansas City not very good against number one wide receivers last year. Brandon Cooks could have a monster game. T.Y. Hilton against the LA Rams, projected at 9.8 points. If he gets 9.8 points against the LA Rams this week on the road, I'll chug a beer. I just don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening without Andrew Luck. I don't think it is. I don't think it's not in the cards. Doug Baldwin at Green Bay, projected at 11.23 points. I think that's about right. I think that's about right. I could see him, doing 50 yards and a touchdown. DeMarco Murray versus Oakland, 12.7 points. That could be conservative. This is not a very good Oakland defense, and it is home, and he's going to get a lot of work. Now, Mixon. This is going to be interesting because it is a home game. It is against Baltimore. The Bengals seem to have all three running backs available, and they're saying that Mixon is like the third back. I don't know how much to believe. He's projected at 8.6 points. That could maybe be about right, but I think that this is going to be a grindy, ugly game. And I'm going to say he's going to be under, but probably more about like 7 points. I think Greg Olsen at San Francisco, 9.3 points. This could also be conservative. We don't know only because San Francisco is such a question mark, but we do know one thing in regards to the Carolina offense is that Greg Olsen has been amazing the past few years. And there's a lot of weapons now. Everybody's healthy, right? The wide receivers are back and healthy and in shape. They have 2 competent running backs now. So do some of those targets go away? I don't know. I just know that Greg Olsen has such a good chemistry going with Cam. I would say 9 is probably about right, but I wouldn't be surprised if he overperforms because this matchup is supposed to be so good. And then Leonard Fournette at Houston, he's projected at 10.5 points. I mean, I think that might be a little, I don't know. I would say under for that as well. And then Mason Crosby in Seattle are the defenses. So let's go ahead and look at Robin's team. Robin has Derek Carr on the road at Tennessee. I said this before. I think that this is going to be a high-scoring game. I think Tennessee's defense isn't great. It's probably just a little under good. And Derek Carr looks sharp. Offense looks really, really good. And I think they're going to move the ball a lot and they're going to score a lot of points. So 18 could be conservative. I think that both these quarterbacks score in the 20s. Wide receivers, we have Devontae Adams, Demaryius Thomas, and Julio Jones. So Julio Jones only projected at 13.5 points against Chicago on the road. I think he could have a 20-point game quite easily. Demaryius Thomas against LA, he's projected at 10. This is all about quarterback play, and we saw his floor last year. We talked about this last week on the podcast, that we saw the floor of Demaryius Thomas last year. And so I guess I don't want to say that 10 points is completely out of the realm of a possibility. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's probably about right. I think 10 points is about right. And then Devontae Adams against Seattle. This will be interesting because there are a few additions that have been made to the Green Bay offense, but especially at the tight end position, that's the only thing that would really worry me as the Devontae Adams owner, because those red zone targets, are they going to go away? But I think that the 9.5 points is probably pretty safe. And LaShawn McCoy only projected for 13 points against the Jets. It could be a 30-point game by Shady McCoy. And then Kareem Hunt against New England. This is extremely interesting. He's projected at 10.4 points. And I want to say under for this game. But the one way that running backs have usually found success against New England is out of the passing game. And there aren't a lot of teams that work running backs into the passing game quite better than Kansas City. And so I could see this being like a 20-yard rushing, but like 70-yard receiving game for Kareem Hunt, getting 60, 70 yards receiving because of the way Kansas City uses their running backs. I think you're really trying to hope that they find a way to score a touchdown, but it's going to be tough for Kareem Hunt. I think it is for this week. Hunter Henry, the tight end against Denver. I think until Antonio Gates is out of the picture, it's always going to be really hard to completely go with Hunter Henry because he's gonna get his. But the thing is, Antonio Brown, when he's there, is usually the preferred target. So this could be the 7.5 projected for Hunter Henry, or could be like 2 points. It's really tough. It's really tough. And then Rob Kelly against Philadelphia. This will be fun to watch because he was able to fight off the rookie. New offense. The 9 projected points, I think that's probably about right. He'll catch a couple of passes, and I could see him getting around 50 yards rushing. And what you're really hoping is for a touchdown, of course. But it's going to be fun to see how Kelly fares in his second year. He was very solid last year. Wasn't great, but he was very good. And so I'm interested to see how he builds off it this year against a good Philadelphia defense at home. And then Graham Gano, the Pittsburgh defense against Cincinnati. And it's really hard not to start Pittsburgh this year or this season against Cleveland. And some people are starting to come around to them being a defense not just for streaming, but for keeping. But we'll see what happens going forward. Definitely have to like the week 1 matchup. And then they're at Minnesota, Chicago, Baltimore, Jacksonville, Kansas City. So pretty solid schedule. Could be good going forward. We'll see what happens with that. Now on the bench, I bring up the bench for this game because it's probably the most interesting in that there is Pierre Garçon on the bench for the Belching Beavers. I think one question you could ask yourself is, would you go with Pierre Garçon at home against Carolina, or would you stay with Fournette against Houston? That's probably the big question that he's going to have to ask himself. And then with Robin, probably the only question that he would ask himself is really 2, in that you have CJ Anderson, who is the guy out of Denver. Do you go with him against the Chargers at home, or do you stick with Kelly against Philly? I think the better defense you would probably say is Philadelphia. although the Chargers are up and coming. That's going to be a tough one. And then Sammy Watkins against Indiana. I know that it's the Rams, but on the flip side, they're playing the Colts. And I'd like to think that Sammy Watkins is going to get targeted, maybe take a couple big shots. So that flex position, he's got some things to play with, whether he wants to stay with Kelly or look at Anderson and Watkins. Because this is a very close matchup, and these are the kind of decisions that are really going to make or break between these two teams. So let's go to the final game of this week 1 between Baked Brie and Joe. Now, Brian kind of leveraged this season for last season, so she doesn't have a lot going on right now. She's projected to lose by 29 right now. She does not have a quarterback in play. So she's probably going to plug in Carson Wentz, and that'll put her at around 96. So Jameis Winston is her quarterback with the Hurricane Irma. Will not be playing. But, Carson Wentz in there. People like Carson Wentz. It is on the road. It's an NFC East game. Anything can happen. He could have a big game. But I think the 16 projected points for him is probably about right. Des Bryant, 13 points. I think that's about right, 12.5. Chris Hogan is a big play away from a monster game, and I think they're going to throw a ton against Kansas City. So I think that he can hit his projected of 8.5. Mike Wallace in Baltimore, kind of like with Jeremy Maclin. These targets, Steve Smith is gone. Danny Woodhead will not be playing, and so there's a lot of targets to go around. It is on the road at Cincinnati. It's going to be a grindy game. I do think that the 8 points is possible, though. But what you're really hoping out of Wallace is for him to break a big one. That's typically what he's able to do, is get one big deep ball game. So Isaiah Crowell is somebody that I'm big on this year, and a lot of people are kind of coming around on, but not really because he's in Cleveland. But I'm really excited to see what he does against Pittsburgh. He's projected at 10 points, and I think that might be about right. And then Duke Johnson, they're going to use him a little bit like Le'Veon Bell this year. They're going to put him in the slot. They're going to have him catching balls out of the backfield. He's kind of like a little extra wide receiver, and he's projected at 7.6 points. And against Pittsburgh, I think that that's definitely doable. I think he's going to see his fair share of snaps and a combination of rushing and receiving yards. I think he can get around 7 points. Now, Kyle Rudolph against New Orleans, he's projected at 7.6 points, which I know is fair because tight ends are usually conservative. But he is one of the most targeted red zone players in the NFL, and I think that he overperforms. I think that he probably scores 14 points. I think he's going to get a lot of catches, and I think he's going to get a red zone touchdown, obviously. Duh. And then Jeremy Hill running back out of Baltimore. We'll see what happens there. Who knows? The whole thing in Cincinnati is so crazy. And then Martavis Bryant in the Arizona defense rounding out for Brienne. Joe has Russell Wilson going against Green Bay on the road, projecting at 19 points. I think that's about right. That feels about right. Green Bay, they're an opportunistic defense. They're not a great defense. Jordy Nelson is his wide receiver, along with Odell Beckham and Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs only projected at 8.7 points. I think that's really low for him, especially since it's a home game against New Orleans, and he's going to be the number one wide receiver out of Minnesota. I think he's going to have a monster year this year, and I think that he's probably going to score about 13 points. Odell Beckham is projected at 13. That's probably about right. Jordy Nelson, 12.5. That's also probably about right. Carlos Hyde against Carolina, projected at 11 points. This is going to be an interesting matchup. Carlos Hyde typically starts the season out strong before he somehow gets injured. Carolina, this is going to be a good test to see if they can match up well, if Kuechly and everybody else is back and healthy, if they can try and contain Hyde. So this is an interesting 11 points against Carolina. It depends what Carolina we get. If we get the Super Bowl year Carolina defense, or are we going to get the Super Bowl hangover Carolina defense? Todd Gurley against Indiana, I think he's grossly underprojected at 11.7 points. The Indy is going to be... It's going to be bad for Indy in all facets of the game. They're not going to have an offense to work with. Their defense is going to be on the field a lot. They're going to get behind, and LA is going to run a lot. They're going to start running the ball, pounding it, and I think Todd Gurley is probably going to have like a 16-point game. Tyler Eifert against Baltimore. He's projected at around 7. That might be about right. And you're really just banking on a touchdown for him. Then Emmanuel Sanders, he's been really solid the past few years. He's like 1,000 yards. He's essentially Mike Crabtree without the touchdowns. So him projected at 9 points, maybe a little bit under that. You should be fine. Steven Gostkowski in Denver rounded out there. Probably the only other questions that you would want to ask yourself if you are Joe is, I mean, you're going to win. But in terms of points, if you're going to be trying to challenge for points, who are you bigger on? Kirk Cousins at home against Philadelphia or Russell Wilson on the road at Green Bay? The projected difference is literally 1 point. Cousins at 20.17, Russell Wilson at 19.13. So there you have it. That's our week 1. We're ready to go. Irma went through and, like I said, destroyed our emojis. And I just want to say thank you to our Vice President Robin and our Slack administrator Matt Keyser, Braggadocious 1-1, for not just restoring our emojis, but giving us we now have more emojis than we've ever had before. So this is exciting stuff. It's an exciting year. I hope everybody is ready for tonight. I know that I am. Kansas City, New England Patriots. Everybody's predicting a blowout, but I'm hoping it's going to be a fun game. Football's back. It's week 1. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'm Peter Livingston. You can follow me at Peter Livingston on Twitter. Shoot us an email at ffdynastypod if you have any questions or any comments. We also have a YouTube page, a Stitcher page, a Podbean page, an iTunes page. You find us. Share with a friend. And this should be a lot of fun. We'll get somebody on next week. I had to go solo dolo this week. But we will have our recap show, and then we will look to week 2 next Tuesday and Thursday. All right, everybody. Good luck this week. Have fun. Football is back. Hug your loved ones goodbye, because essentially till next February, we're going to be in full-on football mode. All right, you guys. Have a good one.